Okay, it did it again. It keeps freezing and then it starts. So I don't know what the deal is with that. Today we're going to talk real quick about this chapter 14 and why occupancy type is so important to consider with our different buildings. So, you're going to read in the book, and if you go through the PowerPoint, by the way, I did everything I could to make that PowerPoint as short as I could. I eliminated over 100 slides or consolidated them or whatever. Sorry about that. Kind of crazy that they felt the need to have 265 or 70 slides. But this is an important subject matter because the occupancy type tells us a lot about what's inside the building. So, and it's something that when we go out and do fire inspections, we really want to be paying attention to, is the occupancy type that the building was built for still the way it's being used? Because a lot of times, especially in rental buildings, big businesses, big warehouses and stuff, one person goes out of business and leaves, another one comes in, and we have a different occupancy type. Where I live in Santa Clarita, there's a lot of filming here. Let me take a sip. And a lot of these warehouses that were built to be for storage or for fabrication are now being used as sound stages. Well, that's a different kind of a use. So that has to go through a process to be reassessed and determined whether the building, whether the roof can handle, they hang a lot of stuff from the roof, whether it can handle that weight, that live load. And then are the sprinklers adequate? Are the exits adequate for the amount of people that are going to be in there? And all of these kind of things. So occupancy type really matters. So I have a story for you that I wanted to tell you about that will kind of drive this home. Now, like I said, in the PowerPoint and in the book, you're going to read about institutions, why they're so important. Why are institutions important? I can't hear anybody answering, but the answer is because people in institutions are non-ambulatory. They can't exit on their own, either because they're in a hospital, or they're too young or too old, or they're handicapped, or we've locked them in because our prisoners are also in the institution category. So they can't self-evacuate. That's a big term. That's very important. Non-ambulatory and self-evacuate are two terms that are connected. So, and then, assemblies, important because lots of people gathered there. Uh, um, Mercantile, F's, factories, S, storage. So high rise, though, is not an occupancy type, but it's a specific category like amusement buildings and malls. High rises, amusement buildings, malls, they've got their own chapters in the building code and in the fire code because they're they're so different, they're so unique. They have very specific codes that apply just to them. So it's important we understand these things. So on the cover sheet of any set of plans that are turned into the building official first and then eventually end up at the fire prevention desk, there's always going to be whenever the plans are turned in, there's going to be a cover sheet. And that cover sheet, there's kind of boilerplates of how they want things set up. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Name of the building, name of the project, name of the builder, name of the architect, maybe the architect stamp on there, that they are a licensed architect. Engineers name, all of that. And then different building departments are going to have specific requirements, things that they want on there. And sometimes they'll even put those online where they have, you need to include this boilerplate and fill in this information. It's different in every jurisdiction, and it's up to the architect, the contractor, and all of them to know those things and to turn it in the way that they want it. So let me change to the next slide. So two of the most critical items on the cover sheet are the construction type and the occupancy type. Now, those two things are going to, because the code is this complicated mess that when you look at it, it gives you a headache. It's great though for if you have insomnia and you need to fall asleep, you can read the fire code or the building code. It's sure to put you to sleep because it is just dull facts, boring material, but it's critical material, right? So the two very important things that are on there, and I highlighted them in yellow there, is this particular building is going to be a type 5B, so wood frame construction, and the occupancy type is an R3, but the garage is a U, which is miscellaneous buildings. So that tells the plans checker which rules apply. And there's gonna be a flow to the things that they look for based on what construction type, what occupancy type. Now, why is it so complicated? Because the code wants to have a flexibility that there are a lot of different ways you can skin a cat. You know, if you want to build a building into, now we have green construction. If you want to build a building into the wall of a hillside, and it's going to be half a cave and half something else, all of these different creative ideas that are coming up, well, you still just have to meet the code, but there are different ways we can get there based on what type of construction. So our story starts with, and just kind of remember this page and how this looks. Excuse me. I swallowed funny. Our story starts with Tutor Time. So I got a phone call to go and do a construction inspection with Tutor Time in Canyon Country. And I showed up, and one of the other inspectors said, Randy, the previous inspector was working with these guys, and there was some issues you might want to pay attention to. Make sure that they've got the proper exiting. Now, this was back in around 2004, 2003, 2002 maybe even. It was before all of the changes to the international code. So we had a different way of typing occupancies. There were different levels of E. Now we would call this an I4 or an E, depending on the age of the children, how many children, etc., etc. So I went in there to do a sprinkler inspection, and we're walking around checking the sprinklers, and I started noticing a lot of odd things. With children back then, with this kind of daycare, if you had infants, you had to have 2 legitimate exits. 2, not just 1. And now they've changed that. If you have direct exit to outside, they're not as strict about the exiting, the alternative way to get out. But back then they were. So I'm looking around while I'm looking at the sprinklers, and I'm noticing that none of his doors to his corridor, or what we would call an exit passageway now, were fire rated. And I finally said something to him, and I said, hey, I know, everything's looking really good on the sprinklers, but I'm kind of wondering why you don't have fire rated doors, fire rated windows on your hallway, your corridor. And he said, well, we weren't required to. And I said, well, that's really odd, because this is, back then we called it an E3, I think it was, an E3, and you're required to have 2 legitimate exits. And you've got a door that goes direct outside, that's great, but you have to be fire protected on the other exit. He said, no. We're Tutor Time. We're an education facility. And I said, oh, really? And he says, yeah, we're an E1, they called it back then. We would call it an E today. And I said, so you sure about that? And he goes, here, come here. And he takes me over to the plans. And let me change to the next slide. And he shows me and he says, I've got stamped and approved plans, and I built it according to the plans. So I don't know what you're talking about, but I didn't have to put up fire rated doors, fire rated windows. And I looked at that set of plans and I said, well, okay, there's a little problem here. And I tried to make it humorous and tried to be light with him, because I could tell he was getting a little stressed out. And I said, listen, okay, I know you've got stamped and approved plans, but I think there's an error. And he goes, well, it doesn't matter. They're approved. They approved them. I built it. I'm not going backwards. And I said, you might misunderstand this. So the guy that I learned a lot about being a fire inspector for, he was a really funny guy. And he used to be very humorous about the way he would talk about things. And he used to talk about how the architect with 8 years of education comes up to the plans checker who's a graduate from high school, but the architect who has 50 times the amount of knowledge is shaking in their boots, because the little plans checker, they've got that big stamp. And if they don't stamp that thing approved, no building gets built. And we used to joke about it and called it the God stamp. I said, you ain't building anything until God tells you to. And that's the stamp. Not me, I'm not God, but the stamp is, so we called it the God stamp. And I said, so you see, you got the God stamp here, but I think you need to read the little words that are hard to read down at the bottom. And basically, in very verbal language, it said, oh, by the way, if I made a mistake when I stamped this, that doesn't give you the right to build something that violates the code. So it covers the fact that the plans checker might make an error, but also the architect, the engineer, the contractor might make an error. And if they do, that doesn't mean you just get to have it that way anyways. You have to do what's in the code. So the stamp doesn't give you the right to violate the code. And I said, you know what we call that clause there? I'm not really a God clause. The God stamp says you can build it, but I got the little clause there just in case you were wondering. I'm human and I can make mistakes, and the architect and the engineer can make mistakes. And if they made a mistake, we got to fix it. And he's like, well, still, I don't understand. And I said, your architect said that this is an E because it's tutor time, but it's not an E. It's a daycare, and you have infants here. And he goes, what? And in the room where we were, they had already delivered their cribs. And I pointed to the cribs and I said, see those over there? And he goes, oh crap. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that way. Oh crud. He said, oh crud. And he's like, oh yeah, you're right. And I said, yeah, if you have infants, you have to have two exits and they got to be legitimate exits. So that hallway has to be fire rated. He said, well, what do we do now? And I said, well, I'll call the building official. And we set up an appointment, and the building official looks at the plans, listens to my story, and he looks at the contractor and he goes, I'm really sorry to tell you this. And he goes, but Randy was right. Yep, that's, we made a mistake, but the mistake really was your architect put E on here, and it's not an E1, it's an E3, or what we would call today an I4. And because of that, you have to have a different kind of exiting system. So what do we do now? The contractor says. Well, the building official says, I'm going to review the plans. We're going to change everything. And then long into the story was, the end result was that they had to add fire rated doors to the corridor. They had to add fire rated windows. So I have a picture here of a fire rated door that's thicker, it's heavier. If you've ever picked up a fire rated door, they're super heavy. A lot of your doors in your house might have two hinges, but I'll bet you the door to your garage has at least three, because it's a fire rated door and it is solid wood. It's solid. And that's meant to slow down fire passing through the door. And the window has that wire in there, or there are versions without wire, but it slows down the spread of fire. Not only did they have to change the doors, the windows, they had to add drywall, thicker drywall, and they had to add dampers, fire dampers to the ductwork. So that's that picture there. See those louvers, when the fire alarm goes off, it sends a message and those louvers shut, and it keeps smoke from passing from one part of the building into the corridor so that people can escape. So this is a great example of how, and how many thousands of dollars do you think it cost? They had doors that now they couldn't use, windows that they had to take out and replace, drywall that they had to pull off and throw in the dumpster, and then new drywall they had to put on, and dampers that the air conditioning guy had to come back, tear apart every ductwork right where it met the corridor and put in these dampers. It was a nightmare for the contractor. I apologized to him and I said, yeah, but on the other hand, these are children. And if we let this go and something happens here and somebody dies, guess who they're coming after? You and me. And I'm not going to let that happen. So occupancy type really matters, and it's a big part, along with construction type, occupancy type. They go together and they guide the plans checker, the architect, the engineers, the contractor in what you can and can't do. So a type 3 building, can you have a high rise in a type 3 building? Yes, you can. Only up to 12 stories. Can you have when you do type 1, if you do type 1 anything, you pretty much, you've got unlimited space, unlimited height, but you got to be able to prove that it's sound. And in buildings, we might give you a ton of space, but we might make you compartmentalize it. A lot of times you go to these big warehouses and it looks like one big building from outside, but actually it's like two buildings, because there's a firewall that goes right through the middle of it and through the roof and all the way up, and 3 or 4 feet, whatever it is, above the roof, that hinders fire and smoke from going from one part of the building to the other. So this was just something, a little additional information for you about this subject matter and why it matters. So, I don't want to go into all of the raw little details, because you can get it in the book, you can get it in the lesson plan and the PowerPoint, but I like to kind of help you apply it to you being a firefighter. you pull up and you know it's a nightclub, what's your number one thought? I mean, yeah, we got a fire to put out. We got a ton of people to rescue, right? You know that if it's an assembly, there's tons of people. You get a restaurant fire. You're thinking people first, right? Rescue is always first. Uh, Limiting the fire from spreading and then extinguishing the fire. But we want to think about the people that are there. So, but if it's a factory, is it a hazmat factory? All of these kind of things. I got different things going on in my mind about my strategy and my tactics and what am I going to do next. And then I'm thinking about what kind of building it is. See how it all fits together? There's a logic to it all, why we do what we do, and why this class is a very important class, even though it's not always the favorite. Okay, that's it. I'm going to post this with some very interesting videos. Take some time, watch the first Interstate Bank video and that short one of how fast fire can go up a high rise by going from floor to floor to floor from the outside. Okay, see you later.